The real horror here isn't the bunker. It's the psychology of the men who built it. Griffin Calloway is not merely uncovering hidden money. He is uncovering a textbook case of inherited trauma, narcissistic control, and betrayal attachment. His grandfather, Henry, did not hide in paranoia. He adapted to prolonged psychological warfare after realizing he was being poisoned. Griffin's loyalty to Perry reveals another pathology: trust conditioned by violence. And Lowen's decision to stay near a dangerous mafia boss reflects the survival logic of someone who has already lost everything. This story is chilling because every character is trapped long before the bunker door closes.
When a wall is torn down, what spills forth is not dust, but the choking legacy of a 30-year betrayal. This introduces Griffin Calloway, age 36, a ghost king in the hierarchy of crime. He commands the East Coast's shadowed underworld from behind a legitimate facade, a monarch beholden to no one. The only man he ever answered to was his grandfather, Henry, the architect of their dynasty. But Henry has been gone for 3 decades, claimed by heart failure, a fiction Griffin never believed. So when the family estate is lost for a mere $120,000 in back taxes, he seizes it without a second thought. He wasn't buying property. He was reclaiming a tomb he knew held the truth of his grandfather's death. The variable he never anticipated? A woman was hiding inside. Her name is Lowen Price, 27 years old, adrift and living out of a beaten pickup. A promising architect whose future was erased by her mother's medical bills. For weeks, the mansion had been her sanctuary, its secrets her only company. So when Griffin's man finds her and a gun is raised, she remains perfectly still. She meets the gaze of the coast's most feared man with a terrifying calm, a calm that stays his enforcer's hand. That one frozen moment rewrote their destinies, for her architect's eye held the key to a buried truth. $40 million and a secret that would shatter his existence. Griffin orders his man, Perry, to lower his weapon, but the barrel stays trained on Lowen, his subordinate's finger resting on the trigger, waiting for the signal to eliminate the complication. Perry insists she's a risk, a witness who has seen their faces and knows this place. But Griffin is completely transfixed by Lowen. There is no begging, no attempt to explain. He has seen every flavor of fear, the sniveling of cowards, the twisting lies of the deceitful. Lowen's silence is a language he doesn't know. It is not the quiet of surrender, but the stillness of a soul who has hit rock bottom and has no more fear left to give. "She stays," Griffin commands, his voice low. Perry starts to object, but a simple turn of Griffin's back ends the discussion. In their world, a leader turning away is a final verdict. It is then that Lowen finds her voice. "I don't accept handouts." Griffin stops, his back still facing her. "I'm not offering one," he says. "You understand this structure. I need you to keep it from falling down. Your labor for my shelter, that is our contract." In that instant, an accord was struck, founded not on trust, but on a shared, hard-bitten pride. That night, as Perry and 2 of Griffin's crew set up a watch downstairs, Lowen withdrew to her corner on the 2nd floor. Her entire world was a blanket, a bottle of water, and a sketchbook she guarded like a sacred object. At night, the mansion became a crushing weight. The wind cried through its bones and the stairs moaned. The house itself felt like a great dying beast. The smell of decay was inescapable, clinging to cloth and skin as if the house itself wanted to devour them. Furniture hidden under white sheets stood like a silent congregation of ghosts. Sleep offered Griffin no peace. He walked the halls with a flashlight, its beam playing over peeling wallpaper and the blank wounds on the walls where paintings used to hang. And then he froze. Hanging from a single corroded nail was an old black and white photo, almost lost beneath a layer of grime. He wipes the glass clean, and an image emerges from the filth. It is his grandfather Henry, sharp in a tailored suit. In his arms, a little boy of 5 or 6 is laughing, his arms draped around the man's neck. It is Griffin. He can only stare, his fingers tracing the cold glass over his grandfather's image, trying to reach across 3 decades of silence. No words are needed. The photograph screams the truth. It shows exactly why the East Coast's most powerful man would abandon everything for a forgotten, crumbling ruin. The following 3 days unearth only dust. Griffin's 4-man team methodically tears the house apart from the blackness of the cellar to the suffocating attic. They break open sealed desks and splinter heirloom wood, discovering nothing. It appeared the old family whispers were true. Henry had cashed out before he died, gambling his fortune away on bad investments that left him with nothing. The accepted narrative was that he died broke and alone in a dirty motel. Perry, Griffin's second in command, repeats his skepticism. "There's nothing here, boss. We're chasing shadows." But Griffin's conviction never wavered. While his men brutalized the house, Lowen existed on a different plane upstairs. She drifted through the rooms with her sketchbook, tapping walls and studying joists in a quiet structural autopsy. She kept her distance from the men, an invisible perimeter none of them dared to cross. But that perimeter was breached on 2 occasions. The first was at 2 a.m. on their second night. Insomnia, a holdover from being a 17-year-old street kid where sound sleep was a luxury that got you killed, propelled Griffin into the upper darkness. He saw a sliver of light from under a door and entered unannounced. He found Lowen on the floor, working in the candlelight. Her pencil moved across the paper with a surgeon's precision. Griffin looked at the sketchbook, and the truth dawned on him. This was more than art. It was a perfect architectural blueprint of the floor, mapping every hidden pipe and support beam, conjured purely from memory. Lowen just looked back, without fear, without shame. For a moment, Griffin no longer saw a vagrant, but a master craftsman the world had thrown away. He left without speaking, the drawing burned into his memory. The second breach happened the next day. While examining a sagging ceiling, Lowen heard Griffin on the phone in the next room. His voice was not the detached tone of her benefactor. This voice was ice cold, every word a perfectly weighted weapon. He was saying, "Tell Vance his excuses don't matter. He owes a debt. He has until Friday. If I don't have my money by Saturday, his financial problems and all his other problems will cease to exist." Lowen stood frozen, feeling for the first time a cold that had nothing to do with the decaying house. The fear that settled over her was not for herself. Survival was a forgotten instinct. It was the brutal understanding that the man who gave her refuge, the man who had watched her work by candlelight, could end a life with the same detachment. She stayed, but now saw the gulf between them not as distance, but as a chasm she could never cross. That afternoon, as Griffin pored over old blueprints, Perry took a call and stepped onto the porch. He glanced at his phone screen, a flicker of indecision, then moved to the side of the house where the stone could muffle his words. He spoke in a low voice, his back to the building. Griffin glanced up from the plans as Perry finished the call and turned around. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. Perry said nothing. Griffin asked nothing. But in that wordless conversation, a crack formed between them. On her 4th day, Lowen knocked on the door to Griffin's room on the first floor, something she had never done. Her face was broken, a stark departure from her usual composure. The quiet strength had been replaced by a tightly controlled panic, as if she'd seen something impossible. "You need to see this," she said. "Upstairs. There was a jammed door. I pried it open." Griffin followed her up the stairs, Perry right behind them. The room was at the far end of the second-floor east wing. A heavy oak door was splintered from its frame, a crowbar lying nearby. The second Griffin stepped inside, he saw exactly why she came for him. The room had once been a study. To call it a former study was a gross simplification. Whatever it was 3 decades ago, it was now a blast zone. Books had been ritually dismembered, their spines broken, their pages creating a thick paper shroud over the floor. The shelves were shattered, resembling a jaw with half its teeth knocked out. This wasn't mindless destruction, it was surgical. A book-by-book search, as if someone was hunting for something inside the pages. They had failed because their target was never the pages. It was the desk. A monolithic walnut desk sat under a boarded-up window, holding a pile of forgotten ledgers. When Griffin laid a hand on one, he left a perfect print in the filth. He blew the dust away and opened the cover. It was his grandfather Henry's handwriting, faded but still coldly precise and legible. This was no journal, it was the supply list for a fortress. March 7th, 4,000 pounds of steel beams, delivered at 2 a.m. April 12th, 2 industrial diesel generators, bought with cash. August 9th, custom ventilation system installed. The final entry was a razor. Contractor grew curious. Contract ended. Griffin turned page after brittle page, his face hardening into a mask. The ledger detailed a 5-year shadow war from 1988 to 93, procuring millions in military assets. Steel, generators, blast doors. His grandfather had built a fortress while the family diagnosed him with dementia. Griffin's gaze lifted, sweeping the study's devastation past the hall, down to the floor. For 3 days, the house had kept its secrets. There was nothing. Not a single steel beam, no whisper of a power source, only the delicate corrosion of old vents. 2 tons of steel, commercial generators, tons of concrete. All of it had dematerialized. Lowen stood framed by the doorway, a silent observer. With a man like Griffin, she knew stillness was the only invitation to speak. Perry drifted near, peering at the book over Griffin's shoulder with a dismissive air that screamed, "See? The old man was unhinged. A man who stockpiled an arsenal only to let it rot. A monument to his own madness." Griffin remained inert. He turned to the last page. The script was broken. The disciplined hand was gone, replaced by a frantic, violent scrawl, the signature of a mind under siege. "They are coming. The hounds are loose. The gallery is sealed." In the terror, a strategy formed. "Let them believe I'm mad. Let them believe I'm ruined." Then, the answer. "The hollow wall contains the truth." Griffin read the words twice, his fingers tracing the shaky ink, trying to feel the 30-year-old panic. And in that breath, the entire story fractured and reset. Henry Calloway was not insane. He was not a paranoid old fool. He had built something inside the house's very skeleton, a secret that required 2 tons of steel and an independent power supply to survive. Its concealment was so absolute it had remained undiscovered for 3 decades. He was fleeing an enemy without a name. Who were they? What hounds? And where in this decaying maze was the hollow wall? Griffin shut the ledger with the care one might give a live explosive. His eyes found Lowen's, his curiosity now a sharp, visceral need. "You've been mapping this place for weeks," he said. "Any structural impossibilities? A wall too thick? A void where there should be none?" Lowen paused. Her eyes flicked from his face to the journal and back. "Not yet," she said. "But now I know precisely what to look for." The next morning, Griffin stood on the porch with his coffee and heard the crunch of gravel. The sound was alien. The lane to Thornfield was so broken that any car had to inch along. This was a smooth, powerful glide, the sound of a beast for which terrain is no object. A black Bentley Continental appeared, its mirror finish reflecting the woods. As it sailed down the ruin of a path, a jewel navigating a gutter, the car stopped. The driver stepped out to open the passenger door. A man of about 62 emerged. His silver hair was a flawless, solid mass. A custom gray three-piece suit was molded to his frame. He scowled at the mud on his way to the porch. But the first thing Griffin noticed was not the suit or the car. It was his smile. It was wide and assured, a pantomime of warmth performed only by the mouth. His eyes were chips of ice, and they scanned the mansion with a look Griffin knew from his own mirror. The look of acquisition. "Griffin Calloway," the man announced, his voice like polished marble, offering a business card so heavy it felt like a thin slate. "Warren Ashford of Ashford and Crane. I have been shaping this valley for 30 years. This estate has been on my list for some time." Griffin took the card but didn't glance at it, just held it. "What do you want?" "Blunt. I can respect that." Warren stepped onto the porch, his eyes still devouring the mansion. "I'm told you recently acquired Thornfield, and that you paid over $120,000 in tax liens to do so. Mr. Calloway, this place is a money pit. The roof is shot, the foundation is crumbling, and the wiring is a museum piece. My interest is purely in the land, 12 acres with this view. The potential is extraordinary. I am offering $2 million, cash. You sign and you've made 15 times your money in less than a week. A clean deal for everyone." Griffin drank his coffee. $2 million was an insulting sum, less than a quarter's take from one of his smaller enterprises. But he said nothing. He simply listened. In his world, a world where the wrong syllable could get you killed, silence was an interrogation tool. An opponent faced with a void will always talk too much. And in his next sentence, Warren Ashford showed his entire hand. "To be honest, the house is a teardown anyway," Warren said, his voice smooth as oil, but his eyes darted to the foundation for a millisecond. A normal person would have missed it. Griffin was not a normal person. It's a tragedy, but the sub-basement suffered a major flood back in the 1990s. The whole foundation is shot. It'd take heavy equipment just to secure the ground before you could build. Griffin's face was a stone tablet. Inside, a cold realization was taking shape. He had been over the original blueprints the night before. Lowen had spent 3 weeks documenting the house's every detail. There was no sub-basement on any blueprint. The house was on soft, poor-quality earth. Such an excavation would have been suicidal for the structure. No flood had happened. The foundation was fine. Warren Ashford was creating a work of fiction, a story that circled one central object, the empty space under the house, the exact spot where 2 tons of steel and 2 commercial generators went missing 3 decades ago. This man knew what was hidden down there, and he had come to collect it. "I'll consider it," Griffin said, his voice so flat it gave nothing away, not even to Perry. Warren stared for a beat, and for the first time, the smile cracked. The performance ended, revealing the predator beneath the expensive suit. "Do not play me for a fool, Calloway," Warren's voice dropped, turning hard and guttural. "Your grandfather tried that gambit, and we all know how that ended for him." He turned, descended the stairs, and entered his car. The Bentley surged away, swallowed by the forest. Griffin remained, his coffee forgotten and cold. Perry moved to his side. "Say the word, boss." But Griffin was silent. He was replaying Warren's last line, a terrible revelation. "Your grandfather tried that gambit." That was not a warning. It was the boast of a man confessing to murder. Warren Ashford knew exactly how Henry Calloway died because his family had engineered it. For 30 years, that suspicion had been a low-grade fever in Griffin's soul. Now, standing on the porch where his grandfather had held him as a child, the fever had a name. That night, a storm broke with theatrical violence. The air had been suffocating, and by 8, the sky was a deep, purple bruise. Thunder exploded like mortar fire, and rain fell in a solid, roaring wall against the ruined roof. The mansion cried out under the barrage, the death groan of a fallen animal. Wind screamed through boarded windows with a human voice. Upstairs, a door began to slam, over and over, a frantic, repeating sound, the arrhythmia of a dying house. Perry and his crew tried to find sleep on the main floor. Griffin did not. He sat in the study's wreckage, his grandfather's journal open, his flashlight beam fixed on a single crystalline sentence. "The hollow wall will keep the truth." He felt her before he saw her. Lowen appeared in the frame of the door, hair wet from a leak, holding a sketchbook like a shield. "I can't sleep," she said, a quiet confirmation of their shared watch. Griffin neither acknowledged nor dismissed her. She came inside, sat on the floor, and rested against a desk. They sat in the silence contained within the storm's fury, 2 figures in a shattered room, sharing a quiet more intimate than any conversation. Then Griffin spoke, his voice a low vibration against the storm. "My grandfather turned this house into a vault. 2 tons of steel, huge generators. He knew they were hunting him, and it wasn't enough." He paused. "A man came today. He wanted the house. He invented a story about the foundation, and then he spoke about my grandfather, with the certainty of a man who knows how to end a life. He offered no name, no context for the 30-year war. He shared only what was necessary for her to grasp the gravity. This was no argument over land. It was a sepulchre, and a trespasser sought to defile it before Griffin could unearth the secret his grandfather had sealed away. Lowen took it in, then opened her sketchbook. "The hidden void," she breathed. "It has to be there." A statement of fact, not a question. "If he built it into the very bones of this house," she added, pointing to a blueprint of the upper floor, "I'll find its seams. But I need new measurements." She stood, already holding the tape, and strode into the hallway. Griffin went after her. Lowen ran the tape down the corridor's full length, pulling it taut, 45 feet. She then moved into the study, a room that backed the hall, and measured its inner wall, 39 feet. She locked eyes with him. 6 feet, she stated. "There's a 6-foot void between this room and the hall." She moved to the north wall, which was hidden by a towering bookshelf, and knocked on its frame. Then, on the wall beside it, the sounds were completely different. "This isn't just a piece of furniture," she declared. "It's built in. This entire unit is part of the house's structure. You only do that when you want to hide the wall itself. Behind this bookcase, there's a 6-foot space that isn't on any plan." Griffin's eyes drifted from the massive shelving to the sledgehammer he'd bought. Now leaning in a corner, the bookcase was a gorgeous antique feature, maybe the last beautiful thing left in the entire decaying manor. Conflict tore through him, a useless rage against the specter of Warren Ashford. The man's disembodied voice, "Your grandfather tried this game," was the final push. Griffin lifted the sledgehammer, its cold weight a balance to his fury. The first strike was a thunderclap, an acoustic bomb that obliterated the room's silence. A shower of splintered wood erupted. With every frantic follow-up blow, he hacked a hole through the facade, his fatigue meaningless, until a fragment of the past appeared, a swatch of faded floral wallpaper. The hammerhead broke through the plaster, unleashing a choking cloud of entombed air. A crowbar served as the next tool, its prying force answered by the scream of tortured nails. And then, a breath, not the house's typical scent of ruin, but an outrush of cold, sterile air. It was the smell of a chamber sealed airtight for 3 decades. Through the swirling dust, Griffin shined his flashlight into the new opening, a portal to a perfectly preserved moment in time. His flashlight's beam revealed not ruin, but flawlessness. A heavy steel door, pristine and unmarked, stood open by just an inch. Beyond it, a spiral iron staircase descended into a pure, light-swallowing darkness. Lowen was at his side, her face covered in dust, a mask of sheer wonder as she stared into the abyss. Their quiet was broken by a clap of thunder from the world outside. They were just 2 people, standing at the edge of a void Henry Calloway had built 30 years prior, a void designed for this exact discovery. As Griffin stepped over the threshold, a deep chill rose from the first step of the spiral stair. The staircase, untouched for 3 decades, showed no weakness. It was utterly solid, as if it existed outside the flow of time. The beam of his light dove into the blackness, only to be swallowed whole. Lowen appeared in the doorway behind him, her words, "I'm coming with you." A simple, unarguable truth. Griffin did not object. The descent was a passage through intensifying layers of solitude. 10 steps down, the stale air turned into the sterile chill of a tomb. At 20 steps, the brick walls became smooth bedrock, cold against the skin. The 80-step spiral ended at a concrete landing. There, Griffin faced a myth made real, a blast door. This was no simple basement. It was a relic of the Cold War, forged from solid steel built to survive the end of the world. A fine black seam showed where the door was open. Griffin threw his entire weight against the crowbar. The hinges shrieked in protest, a high-pitched cry that echoed all the way up the stairwell. The door groaned open, unveiling a perfect, lightless, dark inside, a vacuum where light had never been. Griffin's beam cut into the black, revealing gigantic shapes. In one corner sat a massive, olive-drab machine, its exhaust pipe routed straight into the ceiling. It was the Caterpillar diesel generator, exactly as described in the ledger. Shielded with lead, purchased off-market. Next to it was a gray electrical box, its primary switch in the down position. From this box, impossibly thick cables ran from the generator and spread across the ceiling like steel vines. Griffin faced the panel, a piece of equipment that had been inert for 30 years. He took hold of the breaker, took a breath, and shoved it up. A lifetime seemed to pass in the following second of deep, crushing silence, punctuated only by his own heartbeat and Lowen's gasp. A low hum started, vibrating up from the floor and into his bones. The caterpillar sputtered once, then again, before roaring to life with a deafening bellow, the sound of a giant awakening from a 30-year sleep. The lights above flickered on not at once, but in sequence. Click, click, click. Each one hummed with contained energy. A sterile, white illumination washed into every corner, revealing the staggering size of the space. Griffin's flashlight slipped from his grasp. He was standing inside a massive underground vault, a tomb made of concrete and steel. The ceiling was more than 10 feet high, stretching over a floor of perfectly polished concrete. A low thrum from the walls indicated a ventilation system, somehow still running after 3 decades, pushing cool, dry air through the space. A mahogany boardroom table sat in the middle, a bizarrely civilized object in this subterranean bunker. Against one wall were 6 Mosler safes, hulking in their design, their heavy steel impenetrable. But the far wall was what seized his attention. An enormous cork board, covered in a vast collage of papers and pictures, all linked by a chaotic spiderweb of red string. Every string was a connection, and every connection was a piece of the hidden story Henry Calloway had assembled in his last paranoid years. Griffin turned, his eyes moving from the safes to the board, taking in the full picture. His grandfather hadn't been poor, he hadn't been crazy. His paranoia was a logical reaction to a real danger. Henry had converted his entire wealth into this underground tomb, a time capsule waiting for a future heir to find the truth. As he walked toward the board, Griffin felt the story of his family begin to crack. The center was a large black and white picture of 2 men standing in front of a familiar office building in Poughkeepsie. The younger was Warren Ashford, around 30, his hair not yet gray. His smile was identical to the one Griffin had seen just hours ago, wide but without any warmth. Next to him was an older, harder version of Warren with the same severe jaw and cold eyes. Underneath, a name was written in Henry's red ink, Conrad Ashford. Red strings shot out from the photo like veins from a diseased heart. Griffin followed their trails. The first led to a stack of copied wire transfers from the Cayman Islands, showing hundreds of thousands drained from accounts under Henry Calloway's name. The signatures, though, were clumsy forgeries. A second string led to contracts selling off assets, land, stocks, mineral rights, all signed with the same fake signature and funneled into a shell company that, after 4 layers, led back to Ashford and Crane Holdings. The family's wealth hadn't just disappeared. It was systematically stolen via forgery while Henry was still alive. A third string pointed to a report on the Ashford Creek Dam, an Ashford and Crane project from 1987. Buried inside was an inspector's note. The builder had dangerously cut corners on steel and waterproofing to increase profits, creating a deadly risk that was covered up. But the last string made Griffin grab the table for support. It led to a thin medical file, and every page felt impossibly heavy. It held Henry's personal blood work from a lab in Connecticut from 3 months before he died. The results showed a fatal dose of digitalis in Henry's blood. Not from a doctor, he had no heart issues, but from an outside party. The substance, which comes from the foxglove plant, causes a slow, unstable heartbeat when given in small amounts, leading to cardiac arrest. In the early 1990s, an autopsy would fail to detect such a clever poisoning, ruling the death as natural. Henry Calloway had not died of heart failure. He had been the target of a slow, deliberate murder, a murder he knew was happening to him. By the time he grasped the scheme, his system was too weak to fight back, leaving him just enough energy to record the crime and build this vault, placing his final hope in a future Calloway. Griffin didn't even notice he was shaking until Lowen's hand came to rest on his shoulder. Her touch was a warm, grounding presence. He stood there, frozen, his knuckles white on the table, his breath catching in his chest. In that moment, the feared figure of the East Coast shadows was just a boy again, losing his grandfather all over again. They executed my grandfather, he whispered, the words like shattered glass in the air. The confession was not for Lowen, but for the room, for Henry's ghost, for 3 decades of suffocating silence. He regained his composure and strode to the safes. Time had seized 5 of them, but the smallest, the 6th, was open a crack. Inside lay an immaculate leather briefcase. An envelope rested upon it, the ink familiar. For the last of the Calloway line. With a trembling hand, Griffin broke the wax seal. The script was unmistakably Henry's, but written with a final, indomitable will. By the time you read this, I am dead, and the vultures are circling. It was Conrad Ashford who delivered the poison. My own son, Marshall, is a man of too much faith and not enough spine to see the betrayal. The empire is not gone. I have simply made it disappear. In this case, are $40 million in bearer bonds, untraceable, all issued before 1982. To hold them is to own them. Beside them is the microfiche, the sole original record. It contains the medical reports, fund transfers, fraudulent contracts, the dam assessment, everything required to obliterate the Ashford legacy for generations. They have sought this evidence for 30 years. They will be at this house. His words from the grave were a sacrament of paranoia. Griffin displayed the relics. 40 million in phantom currency and a single slide of damning film. But Lowen's eyes were on him, not the treasure. In the bunker's harsh light, 50 feet below the earth, their shared glance forged a silent, irrevocable pact. In that breath, their world broke. A crash from above, muffled by 30 steps of iron and layers of stone, was the sound of reality intruding. The manor's main door had been forced. Griffin's instinct for survival, an edge sharpened over 2 decades, flared to life. He turned to the antiquated security console, a dormant monument to paranoia, and flipped a switch. The screens flickered on, revealing the grainy phantoms of Henry's 30-year-old network. The primary monitor showed the Great Hall in a terrifying diorama. Warren Ashford stood at its center, his tailored suit a stark defiance of the storm outside. He scanned the room like a king returned to a throne, left cold for 30 years. He was flanked by 2 figures in black as a third glided into view. A lean man in leather, his bald head catching the light. He stalked with a predator's economy of motion. It was Bones. That name was a dark fable on the East Coast. Floyd Bones Keegan was not merely Ashford's enforcer, he was a connoisseur of ruin. But it was the 5th man who froze the blood in Griffin's veins, a man who walked with a confidence Griffin himself had instilled. Perry. Perry Langston standing by his master's side, reporting to his true allegiant. His tone was the detached echo of their own mission briefs, uttered without a hint of coercion. He'll go for whatever the old man concealed. It's only a matter of when. Warren's answering nod was a slow, grim verdict. Find him. Then you will erase him and all he contains. Engineer a collapse. Burn the estate. The storm is our perfect alibi. The screen was before Griffin, but his mind was 18 years in the past, finding a broken Perry on a Boston street. In that man's desperation, Griffin, just 3 years into his own reign, had seen devotion, a fatal error in judgment. He had given Perry absolute trust, a coin the man had just cashed in. That clandestine call from the terrace, a hairline fracture he'd ignored, was now a chasm of catastrophic failure. Griffin, Lowen's voice cut through the haze of his memory. We need to go right now. She pulled him back from the edge of his recollection, her pragmatism a stark reminder that to stand still was to accept death. On the screen, Bones began to climb. The beam from his flashlight sliced through the study's darkness, landing on the empty space where the bookcase had been. Griffin watched the exact moment recognition dawned. Bones spun, his voice a guttural roar that tumbled down the stairwell. He is here! There is a way down! The pounding of boots on the floor above was followed by the ring of metal on the spiral stairs. The hunt was upon them. Griffin snatched the briefcase. Lowen, anticipating his move, secured the microfiche case inside her coat. He then lunged for the generator and its massive green-painted iron handle. Green key locks the exit. He threw his full weight into it. A shrill alarm screamed through the bunker, making Lowen clamp her hands over her ears. A hidden plate of steel crashed down from above as the blast door sealed the passage below, transforming the stairs into a steel tomb. A bullet sparked against the steel, its ricochet a piercing shriek through the corridor as embers rained down. Griffin instinctively moved to cover Lowen, a visceral need to shield the only person who remained. With a concussive boom, the blast door hit its housing. A series of heavy, reverberating clicks announced the automated deadbolts driving home, sealing them inside, and that there was only silence, broken by the muted, futile drumming from beyond the door. They stayed crouched behind the table, the sharp smell of cordite in the air. They were trapped, yet secure, entombed 50 feet below ground in a concrete sepulchre. As he helped Lowen to her feet, the door's impact still echoing in his bones, he grasped their new reality. The frantic pounding outside was already softening, becoming as distant and meaningless as thunder. Their pursuers were imprisoned, but so were they, captive to the final act of Henry's grand design. A red wheel opens the passage. Griffin raced to the bunker's far wall, past a map laced with a web of red yarn. He saw it, a heavy steel pipe jutting from this concrete, topped by a huge red-painted cast-iron valve. 3 decades of rust held it fast. He put his entire body into it, the muscles in his neck standing out like cords, but the iron refused to yield. Together. Lowen was there, her hands finding purchase on the opposite side. She knew the direction instinctively, to the left. On a count of 3, they shoved, his power and her will, a unified force against the corroded metal. A moment of straining silence was broken by a loud crack, the sound of an ancient seal giving way. Flakes of rust fell as the wheel began to turn with an agonized groan. The wall behind the map hissed, revealing itself to be a pressure-sealed hatch swinging inward on a void of pure, primordial black. The scent of damp soil flooded the room, a raw mix of decay, tangled roots, and the metallic tang of sodden clay. A tunnel carved from the bedrock and reinforced with steel ribs lay ahead. It was a silent monument to Henry's paranoid genius, a path out of this grave and into the living world. Griffin's light carved a sliver into a space barely wide enough for one. He and Lowen met each other's eyes in wordless agreement. She went first, and he followed her into the earth's cold embrace. Griffin's light threw their shadows, huge and distorted, against the weeping walls. The air was old and heavy, making every inhalation a conscious effort. Above them, support beams groaned with the weight of the world. Lowen stumbled, her foot snared by a root, and she pitched forward, Griffin's arm shot out, catching her, pulling her upright in one seamless motion. He did not let go of her hand. It was the first time they had touched, not from necessity or command, but as a silent confirmation they were still breathing. Their hands stayed clasped in the suffocating dark. When Griffin spoke, his own voice sounded foreign, stripped of its usual icy command and softened with a vulnerability he hadn't shown in 20 years. "Thank you for staying." Lowen never broke her stride. Her answer was a single, reassuring squeeze, her voice clear in the gloom. "Don't you die on me, Calloway. You still owe me a house." The tunnel floor began to rise, the ground turning from damp soil to thick mud as the quality of the air began to shift. The raw, confining odor of deep earth gave way to the smell of rain on open grass, the scent of freedom. Griffin looked up. A huge slab of reinforced stone formed the ceiling, cleverly masked as the carriage house floor. Its release built into a steel housing. Letting go of Lowen, he pressed his palms flat against the rotting wood and pushed. With a deep metallic moan, the slab swung up on counterweights, sloughing off years of dirt and moss in one motion. A rush of cold, rain-scoured night air filled the passage, a sudden, stunning baptism. He launched himself out, using the ledge for leverage before offering a hand down to Lowen. They collapsed together onto the wet grass, rain plastering their hair to their faces as they gasped for air. For a long moment they lay still, just taking in the open sky like newborns. Pushing himself up, Griffin scanned the area. They were in the ruins of a carriage house on the edge of the Thornfield grounds. 3 stone walls remained, but the roof was gone, the interior so thick with overgrowth no one would ever guess what was hidden beneath. A muddy track led from the ruin toward the estate's distant gate, where his car was parked hundreds of yards away in the deluge. Griffin did not run. He took out his phone, the screen already slick with rain, and dialed the one number he knew would answer, even at 3 o'clock in the morning during a hurricane. Keats McGrath picked up on the second ring. He asked nothing of the chaos or the reason, he just waited. In 20 years, Keats knew that when the call came at an hour like this, questions were a liability. "Thornfield House, Hudson Valley. I need 12 men, full tactical." "Pay attention. Warren Ashford is in there with 4 of his people, Bones included." Griffin let the silence hang. Perry turned on us. "I want them alive, Keats. Every last one. Alive and ready to confess." A beat of pure shock echoed down the line before Keats, ever the professional, masked it. "Give me 45 minutes, he confirmed. That the call cut. Slipping the phone away, Griffin moved back toward the carriage house. Lowen was pressed to a stone wall soaked through, a $40 million briefcase caked in grime sitting beside them. Inside, the cash was pristine, vacuum sealed by a man dead for 3 decades. In the darkness, they waited. The only sound was rain hammering the broken building and the cadence of their breathing. Griffin's voice cut through the downpour, not from a need to talk, but because a dam of discipline held for 30 years had finally broken. The bunker discovery was the key. "I was 6, he started, when my grandfather stood with me for a photo by Thornfield's gate. He wrote on the back, 'This empire is made of blood, not money. Protect it, boy.' It was the last photograph we ever took. He was gone 3 months later. Silence fell, and the storm rushed in to take its place. A heart attack was the official story. My father, the whole family, they bought it. I never did. Something in my bones told me it was wrong. But nobody listens to a 6-year-old's premonition, and you don't challenge a grown man's lies. I've held on to that doubt for 3 decades. His eyes found the mansion, a jagged shadow against a bruised sky. Tonight, I found the truth. My grandfather was murdered with poison. He knew his end was near. He didn't run. He built a tomb for the men who did it, burying the proof where only I might one day find it. He was betting on me to come. 30 years passed, he put his faith in me. And tonight is the first time I have truly justified that trust. A hairline fracture appeared in his voice on the last word. Lowen heard it. She stayed motionless for a long beat. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper meant for the shadows, not for him. My mother had lung cancer. By the time they found it, it was stage 3. I dropped out of Columbia to take care of her. 14 months. 14 months trying to sleep in hospital chairs, living off vending machine food, listening to that goddamn ventilator. Rhythmic sounds still bother me. She pulled her knees in tighter. The last night my mother couldn't talk. The machines were breathing for her, but she squeezed my hand once before she was gone. She didn't cry. She had this awful calm, the kind you see in people who ran out of tears years ago. After she died, everything went with her. The savings, the house, my tuition, the medical bills ate it all. I don't tell anyone this. People never ask, and saying it aloud doesn't fix a thing. A hush descended. A mob boss and a woman with nothing, sheltered in a ruin from a storm, a briefcase of $40 million between them. Neither of them looked at it. The money was now meaningless. For the first time, their pain was not a solitary burden. There were no useless comforts, no, I'm sorry for your loss, or it gets easier. They just shared the darkness, letting the company of another do what words never could. 40 minutes on, beams of light sliced the deluge. 3 black sport utility vehicles crawled up the muddy path. A large red-bearded man, Keats McGrath, stepped out, his 11 armed operators fanning out behind him. Griffin met him, gave a series of low commands, and in under 10 minutes, Thornfield House was completely sealed. They found Warren, Bones, Perry, and 2 hired guns exactly as Griffin described. Trapped in a stone corridor between 2 impassable doors, their fury exhausted and replaced by a stark helplessness. Keats's team brought them to the main level, forcing them to kneel with their hands locked behind their necks. Griffin walked into the cavernous sitting room, a ghost of a place shrouded in dust covers, stopping just before Warren Ashford. The old man was on his knees, his fine suit destroyed, but his gaze burned with cold defiance. Griffin simply gazed down, impossibly still, with the peace of a man who has already walked through hell. 30 years ago, your father fed my grandfather poison, Griffin said, his voice as casual as if remarking on the rain. Digitalis, in tiny doses over months. He made murder look like a slow decline, and no one ever questioned it. Then you built your kingdom on the ashes of my family. You thought that truth was buried with him. Griffin flipped open the briefcase, removed a compact black case holding microfiche, and held it out for Warren to see. You failed to recall my grandfather always had a fail-safe. The medical files, the illegal money transfers, the forged contracts, the report on the dam, it's all on here. The original records, everything the feds need to bring down Ashford and Crane Holdings inside of 48 hours. Warren's stare fixed on the case, and for the first time all night, the iron resolve in his eyes began to crack. Griffin didn't hand over the proof. He locked the microfiche in his personal safe back in Manhattan, then sent out 3 copies in under 24 hours. The first went to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, accompanied by an unsigned letter outlining the entire plot. The second landed on the investigative desk of the New York Times, ready for a major expose. The third copy was couriered to Orla Finch, Griffin's lawyer, bearing one clear command. If anything happened to Griffin Calloway, if he vanished, had an accident, or died unexpectedly, Orla was to leak the entire file to every news outlet and police agency on the East Coast within the hour. It wasn't about seeking justice. It was a pure show of force. He didn't have them taken into custody that evening. He let the information spread, giving them 48 hours to stew in their dread, forcing them to watch their empire crumble before the authorities came. Federal agents raided the Ashford and Crane offices in Poughkeepsie on a Tuesday morning, confiscating servers, drives, and 43 boxes of paperwork. 11 executives were escorted from their desks in restraints. Warren Ashford was taken from his home that morning. He was in a silk dressing gown, holding a coffee, his face a complete blank, as 6 federal agents in body armor stood on his manicured lawn. Bones was caught 2 hours after that in a cheap motel, frantically trying to wipe his phone. The catalog of charges was long: conspiracy to murder, blackmail, laundering money, 30 years of racketeering, and endangering the public with the damn project. The news cycle erupted. The Hudson Valley's most revered property empire was unmasked as a crime family overnight. Griffin, for his part, wasn't watching the coverage. The night Warren was taken, he sat in a quiet Italian place in the West Village, the kind without a name on the door, just the flicker of candles and the scent of basil. Griffin had Keats bring the betrayer to him, through the back. This wasn't a meeting, it was a reckoning. Perry Langston was seated across from him, back straight, hands flat on the table, looking Griffin squarely in the eye. He didn't try to run. He offered no excuses. He knew better than anyone that in their line of work, running and reasoning were equally pointless. Griffin ate his pasta with a slow, deliberate pace, like a man who had all the time in the world. He drank some wine, set the glass down, and finally met Perry's eyes. And Perry, a man who hadn't broken eye contact with an enemy in 18 years, was the one who looked away first. "Do you want to know what I hate the most, Perry?" Griffin asked, his voice calm. "It's not the betrayal. That part is simple. Desperate men with high stakes do it all the time. What I cannot stand," he stopped, turning the stem of his wine glass, "is that you actually thought I wouldn't know. For 18 years, I taught you how to play this game, and you still misjudged me so completely. That is the real offense." Griffin wouldn't waste a bullet on Perry. A bullet would be a kindness. Instead, while Perry ate his last supper, Griffin began to methodically unmake him. Before Perry even stepped back outside, his life had been erased. His bank accounts were sealed shut. His encrypted phone was now a useless brick. The Brooklyn flat Griffin owned was already being cleared out by a cleanup crew. The final touch was a blast message to every player from Boston to Miami. Perry Langston no longer exists. Aiding him is an act of war against me. In their world, to be killed meant you mattered once. But to be erased from the ledger, to have every door slammed shut, to become a ghost walking among the living, that is a fate worse than death. Perry Langston walked out of that restaurant and vanished from the criminal map of the East Coast. 1 month on, the Hudson Valley was a riot of autumn color. The overgrown track to Thornfield House was now a perfectly smooth road. flanked by towering oaks dropping leaves of fire and gold, as if rolling out a new carpet for the changing of a season. And at the end of the lane, the mansion was no longer a skeleton. It was experiencing a profound rebirth. Steel latticework scaled the entire east wing, where crews were carefully laying new stone and healing the broken roof. The blinded windows were gone, replaced by fresh oak frames and glass that drank in the sunlight for the first time in 30 years. Even the front doors, once shattered by Warren Ashford, were now flawless replicas, their brass glowing with a polished fire. And directing this symphony of restoration, pointing to blueprints, was none other than Lowen Price. But this was not the same woman Griffin had found huddled on the second floor. The sharpness in her eyes was still there, but her bearing now held a new kind of power. It was not defiance, but the quiet command of someone who knows they belong. Griffin had given her the entire Thornfield project, a studio, and arranged for her to finish her degree at Columbia that spring. Her tuition was paid by the Henry Callaway Scholarship, an endowment for architecture students Griffin created in his grandfather's name. To Griffin, a legacy was never about prestige. It is the promise that the worthy are never forgotten. Griffin's lone SUV pulled up. He stepped out, his usual phalanx of black cars absent, and just took it all in. With his hands buried in his pockets, he watched the sun catch on the steel. For the first time, this place wasn't a tomb. It was stirring from its slumber. Lowen saw him, finished with her foreman, and moved across the grounds. Dusting of plaster in her hair, blueprints under one arm, her boots caked in mud. She stopped beside him, her eyes following his. "The roof is 2 weeks from completion," she said, her voice professional, yet humming with pride. "The Great Hall needs another 3 months. We're gutting all the old wiring and pipes, but the study—" She turned, the barest hint of a smile on her lips. "I kept the hammer mark, told the painters to leave it. It's a testament." He met her eyes, and in the silence that passed between them, nothing needed to be said. They knew that scar was not simply damage, even the crack through which a secret buried for 30 years could finally breathe. Griffin drew the faded black and white photo from his coat, Henry Callaway holding him, a 6-year-old boy, on these very steps. He walked into the study, straight to the gouge in the wall that marked it like a battle wound, and set the picture on the new windowsill. It faced the light pouring over the autumn leaves. "The space is filled, grandfather," Griffin whispered, his voice a murmur meant only for the house itself. "And the house has its keeper." Lowen stood at the doorway, granting them the moment. Then he turned to her, and the most feared man on the East Coast smiled a true smile. This was not the smile of a kingpin. It was the look of a man who had finally found the one thing $40 million and a criminal empire could never buy him: peace. Lowen came to the window. She laid her hand over his, a simple, silent act. It was how she'd touched him in the bunker when his world was coming apart. Except this time, his world wasn't breaking. It was being made whole. They stood there, watching the afternoon unfold. The trees were aflame with color. Leaves danced in the wind, and Thornfield House finally echoed with life. The story of Griffin and Lowen is, at its heart, a tale of walls. The physical one Henry built for his secret, the emotional fortress Griffin built around his heart, and the 6-year prison of poverty that held Lowen. Each had to fall for them to be free. The things we treasure most are not kept behind a lock. Sometimes they are found only when we find the courage to take a hammer to our own prisons, to face a terrible truth, and to let someone in when you thought you would be alone forever. If this story moved you, I would be honored to know. What part of it struck the deepest chord? And have you ever had to tear down a wall in your own life of fear, of sorrow, of your own past to find what was waiting on the other side? Please tell your story in the comments. I read each one, and it would be a gift to hear yours. If this reflection brought you any value, a like helps it find others. Share it with a friend who needs to hear this message today. And if you're new here, subscribe and ring the bell to join us for new stories every day. To every single one of you, I wish you deep health, a life of happiness, and a true measure of inner peace. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I will sign off now, and I will see you in our next story.